Hey, everybody, welcome back to the JPU Show, a show with honest and practical advice for aspiring and veteran podcasters with the founders of the Jax Podcasters United group, like myself, your host, Bader Milligan, and my co-host and co-founder, the JPU, the amazing big brain, Blythe Brumley. Hey, Blythe, how you doing?
Hello. Doing great. Ready to talk about podcast ads and attentive effectiveness.
All right.
The alliteration is strong with this.
Yes, I see. And you know what? You jumped the gun, but you're right. That's what we're talking about today. Today is my turn, or this topic is one that I brought to the table. And it's about podcast ads and how effective they are at maintaining the attentiveness of listeners. There we go. Boom. It only took us 4 tries. All right. You guys won't see the other bloopers, but here we are. All right. So yeah, we're talking about podcast ads. Which this sounds like I don't know if it's an unconventional Bader topic. I feel like, this is kind of right up my alley, even though I think this is one you might expect from Blythe. But I decided to bring this one to the table because I saw an interesting headline in Pod News earlier this week that said podcast ads generate nearly the same level of attentiveness as TV. And the hyperlink took me to this very robust survey and report from, I believe it is from the Cumulus Media Group. They shared a report and their key findings from several attentiveness firms, which is something new I learned. I guess there's a couple of firms out there in the world that test the quality of ads that help advertisers understand if like their ads and their brands and these commercials that they make will actually be effective. So this is all about, audio ads and attentiveness. So I want to share why and how it impacts or benefits podcasters. In short, audio ads are still a very viable and lucrative monetization strategy. They're also beneficial to advertisers because the audio format, and specifically podcasting, listeners are more engaged, are more inclined to be more attentive during like the listening experience. And that's what this report it's a very long report. I'm trying to dilute a lot of the findings and whatnot to a short and sweet YouTube video. So I'll just be sharing. I'm gonna have a link to the report in the show notes. You can check it out for yourself. I'm just gonna be sharing some of the key findings and things that kind of intrigued me. So there is an attentiveness firm, which was new to me. There's a couple of those out there, and their job is to measure the quality of ads. So they study how good an ad is for, obviously for advertisers, for big companies and brands that are trying to figure out, hey, will this ad actually resonate with our target demo? Are they actually listening? Are they absorbing or memorizing the content? Are they getting it right? So there's a couple of firms out there that have done studies into, how attentive listeners are depending on the medium. And what they found is that $1,000 of AM, FM radio ads require almost more than double that when it comes to like Facebook ads achieving the same level of attention. So what they found was that audio platforms generate nearly the same attentiveness as TV. So in short, you have to spend more money on digital ads that, for Facebook, for TikTok, versus running ads on an audio platform. Audio tends to perform better, just as well as TV, running ads on TV, because the listenership is a little more attentive. They're listening, they're absorbing more. Another interesting.
Real quick, did they say if it was, the auto inserted ads, or did they say if it was like host read ads? Did they differentiate between the two?
I think it was mainly host read ads, but I don't know if they differentiated to that core. I believe it's just, host read ads. But they were saying it's part of it's part of the podcast medium where I'm trying to scroll through a bunch of notes, but they're saying that listeners of podcasts, their top state is what they're called, is a state of wanting to learn something new. So they lean into, they pay attention. They're looking for context. They're there to learn. Versus they say that music streaming services, the top need of the listener is to relax. So they call that they're leaning back to the content. So they're playing it in another room. They're not as focused. They're there to relax. Versus podcasts where you're a little more attentive. So if an ad runs, they're saying that not only are listeners less liable to skip the ads, but they're more liable to listen to it like take it in and memorize it.
Well, I think with that, and just sorry, just to interrupt, but I think with podcasting in particular, it's unique there where any other medium that you are, engaging in, you have to watch it, you have to read it. With podcasting, it's very complementary to your life. You can be cooking, you can be cleaning, doing laundry, driving. So there's less like if I start a podcast and I hear ads, I skip them. But if I'm in the middle of listening and I'm doing something, I'm not skipping those ads and I'm listening to them. So I think, just to co-sign what that last data point said.
Yeah. So there's also mention in this report that they make mention of this Association of National Advertisers reveals there are three states, and I think it's to your point here, but the Association of National Advertisers, they outline 3 stages of what they define as the attention pathway. There's get noticed, where you're just noticing the ad. Oh, I'm listening to an ad. Hold attention, okay, now I'm focusing. What is this about? And the last path is impact memory, which reads, with attention now assured, the creative must deliver a brand message that affects the short or long-term memory of the person paying attention to the ad. So in short, if you can hit those 3 paths for a listener, the better that they're retaining or that ad is having an impact on them. So I guess, and diluting this down to the most basic, what I'm trying to get at is that the podcast format is more geared toward, you have more attentive listeners. So running an ad is more effective because it's part of the nature of podcast listeners. Versus running an ad on, say, like Facebook or Reddit. And I've got the chart in our show notes here. Like I said, I'm going to share the link to the study in the show notes itself, and you can see all the graphs and charts. But I found it pretty crazy that for the same amount of money, to achieve the same attentiveness of $1,000 in AM/FM radio, $26,000, 2635 would need to be spent on Facebook. And then, Reddit is right up there. LinkedIn is right up there. So the more digital, on these platforms where the goal isn't so much to be attentive or, you're trying to learn something new, your advertiser having to spend more money to achieve the same effectiveness as AM/FM radio, these very primarily audio focused formats.
That makes sense because when you're on social media, the ads interrupt your experience. Like I have loved TikTok since it kind of blew up during, 2020, but now so many ads are on that platform and they try all these different ways to make you watch these ads, and it's an instant skip for me. So say, for example, I'm watching a video that I really enjoy. It gets to like the last couple of seconds. TikTok now will automatically play an ad and just swipe up for me to an ad when I'm still trying to like watch that video or hear it even on the loop. And so I cannot stand that. And so for social media, I think it's more about interrupting your audience, whereas in podcasting or audio formats, you are almost complementing the experience. And so I think it kind of, maybe the big takeaway, because I just actually wrote this down because I'm looking at to re-record my ads. I've had the same ads in my show for a while now, but I really like that takeaway that you said, that ads that help people learn and adding in. And so my light bulb just went off, like, oh, instead of, just talking about someone's software, someone's service, I can start off with a fun fact or some kind of fact that helps draw that person in so that they continue listening to that ad and continue listening to the show. I think there's like a level of like saturation where you kind of want to be conscious of, because this other report that you brought up, I don't know if you want to bring it up later on, but the Podescribe report, they were talking about how ad stacking and high frequency, which is campaigns with ad stacking, such as double spotted ads or a high frequency of 15 plus ads per listener, which is nuts. Imagine 15 ads in a podcast. That's crazy. But they say the show severely diminished the performance. This suggests that a saturation point where too many ads can negatively impact effectiveness. it's kind of like take it with a grain of salt that like podcast listeners are listening to your ads, but don't overdo it. Like there's a breaking point. Do you have like a breaking point, I think, for ads and the shows you listen to?
So if I did, I probably wouldn't be listening to my two primary ones. One of my favorite podcasts to listen to is the Questlove Supreme podcast. By far one of my absolute favorite shows. But what kills me is the amount of ads they have and how long they run. It's so much so that it's a muscle reflex. Like I know, I've got to hit it, the fast forward 15 seconds, like, 8 times or 9. Sometimes it's like 9, other times it's like 12, depending on. But they just have it placed, and it's just so much. They'll run like 4 or 5 ads back to back. It equates out to like a minute and a half. I know there's a minute and a half.
That's actually not bad for a minute and a half to have 4 ads.
It's just that it's stuff that like I don't need, or I already have. They do like Airbnb ads. It's like, all right, I already and then sometimes they have hotel ads. I'm like, okay, I don't need this particular hotel right now. They'll have ads for, Florida Blue insurance. I'm like, I definitely don't need that.
So they're just taking checks from anybody. That's which
it feels like it, but
no fault. But I think maybe they should take a different approach. But
look, it ain't broke. And I guess it's been working out for them.
It's kind of broke because you skipping the ads.
Is it? Because I'm still listening every week, like, religiously. But I think to go back to this, I found it interesting that there are firms that specifically measure attentiveness. Like we talk about, I don't think that's something that we've brought up ourselves. We talk about the importance of like, running ads, whether they be host read or dynamically inserted into podcasts as being a viable monetization strategy, getting ads.
Did they say the methodology of how they determined that? Like, are they studying?
Yeah, actually, yes. Yeah. So Adelaide, hopefully I'm saying that right. They actually have a measurement for attentiveness. It's called the AU metric, which measures attentiveness. I'll see if I can find
sounds
how
like the fake ESPN
yeah. So
QBR status.
It says Adelaide helps marketers move beyond viewability with AU, the first omni-channel attention metric that increases the transparency of media quality. So, they actually found a way to, I guess, I don't know if it's scientifically backed, but a way to measure.
Sounds like marketing speak, to be honest.
It kind of does. But look, I mean,
I would like to know how are they doing this? Are they measuring like fast forward? How can you possibly do that in an audio file unless you are actively like watching somebody listen to a show and then, or maybe you immediately afterwards like poll them?
So. I think they. I think
that's the only way to do it.
I think the report does bring up, that they are testing it on, test subject sounds weird, but I can't think of the other word. But they're testing it on people to like see if they retain what ad was played. Do they remember it? And I mean, that's kind of the gist of this report is that audio format retains more attention than say like, a digital ad or and their other point too was that the myth of you need video and sound and visual cues for ads to be effective isn't necessarily the case. That audio is a strong platform and medium for ads to be absorbed and for listeners to pay attention to what you're trying to sell. Yeah. So I bring that up and I share this. And once again, it's a very robust report. It'll be linked in the show notes. There's even a really helpful 13-minute video where they just specifically talk about the key findings. And once again, that's from the Cumulus Media Group that has done this media attentiveness and ad skipping report, which is
Westwood One Audio Active Group,
which is
wondering.
Super nerdy, podcasting stuff. But I think in closing, what I'm getting at is that we've talked about a hurdle of finding sponsors and having, corporate, I don't know, like working with advertisers and finding sponsors is that you've got to educate them, that you've got to provide the backing, the research into why podcasting is a viable medium for advertisers. And I think when you see reports like this that tell you that, hey, a company, an advertiser is going to have to spend double what they would have to spend double on Facebook, Reddit, and TikTok versus running an ad on a podcast and have it actually be impactful and memorized to a listener, I think is power. That's power to an indie podcaster that could bring facts, that could bring these reports to a potential, to a potential sponsor, to a potential company that wants to work with them or is looking for a way to run audio ads.
Yeah, I would agree with that last statement. I would really, as far as like podcasters using this kind of information, I think you use the headline and that's it. Because looking at some of these graphs and stuff,
It's
I
quite a
can't
bit. It's a
I
lot of
can't
graphs
help.
to make sense of. I
But
agree.
it's also like how much of this is bullshit? Like how much of this is just made up arbitrarily by some metric that I'm not 100% sure of how they came up with this metric. What's the methodology? What is the amount of people that, they have surveyed per these ads? What kind of show? What are they, host read ads? Are they, automatic ads that, or dynamic insertion? So I have a lot of questions around that, and I'm sure all these 1,000 charts might mention that, but I still think that it is very challenging. It's very difficult to measure ROI on a podcast ad, and I think companies like this that are trying to convince you that they can do it are selling a product or a service. So you have to take that also with like a grain of salt. They're probably selling this metric in order to get more advertisers to advertise on their shows.
But I think if the goal of an advertiser, knowing that they're not going to maybe get a customer in the first listen, but if the goal is to imprint and leave an impression, knowing that it's going to take some repetition and repeat listening, I think knowing that, okay, well, at least running an ad on a podcast or an audio ad is going to be listened to, and the customer is going to be attentive to it a little more than, say, me running an ad on Facebook.
I would
More power.
agree with that, but I don't know that we could ever attribute a specific amount of dollars or amount of attention span that is wide ranging, because they're comparing this to all of these other different mediums where there's so many other variables.
Ooh.
Facebook advertising is just a beast in and of itself, where you have to have the right copy and the right headline and the right graphics, and whether they appear in a carousel or you're showing a video or it's vertical or it's horizontal. Like there's all these different variables for each of these different advertising places that I think it kind of just muddies the water a little bit. And this study screams as if you are an podcast advertising firm trying to convince companies to place money with you, because their shows, they have the ability to measure it. And we have to, this is a bigger topic inside of like the world of like marketing and sales, which is kind of where I live a good portion of my life. And marketers are so obsessed with attributing value and ROI to a podcast play that it is unreasonable. It sets up bad expectations. And so when you look at podcast advertising, to your point, Badr, we have to educate our clients on what is a realistic outcome that that customer or that client of yours is going to get from advertising with your show. If they're expecting X amount of sales or X amount of leads coming from your show, then that is a big red flag, in my opinion. Podcast advertising is for brand awareness. There is no straight line from listening to a podcast ad to that person purchasing a product. It doesn't exist, and anybody who says otherwise is lying to you or trying to sell you something. This goes for the whole of the advertising industry in and of itself. And so I don't think that this is very different from that, where they're trying to attribute a value to something that simply can't have that value on it. You are advertising on a show to build brand awareness, to build that familiarity so that someone goes to Google and they search up your company, or they go to social media and they search your company. Now, what happens if that user goes to Google and then searches for your company, and then they see digital ad from your company? You click on that ad and you fill out a form on that website, or you make a purchase. The person who's getting credit for that ad is Google, when Google was just the pass-through channel that made that transaction happen. But Google is getting the credit for it. And so there's all of these different, I'm getting on a little bit of a soapbox here, a lot of these things, we have to be better about educating our clients and telling them we don't really know. And it's okay to embrace the we don't really know. There are other things that you can do. You can have a website. You can put a link in your show notes to them. You can put a trackable link, use a tool like Bitly or, another one of these link shortening tools where you can measure a little bit more. If you have a podcast website, that goes an additional mile, especially if you are creating content around that particular episode. Highly advise that. These are creating those signals that the person or that the client who is responsible for giving you that money can look in their own reports and say, oh, okay, we got 10 visitors to our site from this particular podcast episode. None of them became leads. Is that the podcaster's fault or is that the advertiser's fault? I sent the horse to water, but it's your job to make them drink. And so we have to set up these realistic expectations. And I think that stuff like this, these kinds of studies, I like to hear it from the theoretical point of view, but I don't know how much of this is based on concrete evidence, if that makes sense, because that concrete evidence doesn't exist.
I like a couple of points you brought up in terms of, this isn't a clear pathway. For the record, the report never mentions that. It doesn't say, hey, this will lead to X amount of sales. It just says that audio ads lead to more attentiveness from listeners compared to digital ads based on
our proprietary metric that we don't
know. Now I did look it up really quick. And I mean, it's proprietary. I mean, would you want to share the secret sauce of how you're
because
studying?
Because it doesn't exist.
All right. Well, look. Let me see if this changes your mind. And no, nor am I trying to completely cape for this company I'm not too familiar with, but I went on the Adelaide website, and they do have I think they share their metric. Adelaide's AU attention metric is generated by a machine learning model that evaluates hundreds of media quality signals, eye tracking data, and full funnel outcome data. In display and video placements, these signals fall into categories like clutter, placement position, coverage, and in-view duration. Not really sure what all of that means, if I'm being completely honest. But it sounds like it. I mean, I see eye tracking data.
Creepy.
I mean, how is it going to see if you're paying attention? Anyways, I feel like we went on a tangent here. My original point stands that running ads on your podcast is still a very viable monetization strategy, and clearly, based on this report, for advertisers, it means the opportunity to maybe have your ad, your message, maybe ingrained with the listener a little more, which might maybe lead to a sale. It is not clearly defined in here at all. I think Blythe brought up a couple of good points about the reality of it. There's a lot more factors that go into being aware of an ad or a product or whatever, and actually it resulting to a sale. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely a fair point. And I would still, I have no scientific way of backing this up, but I would still argue that the nature of listening to a podcast creates a more conducive environment to listen to the ad.
Love it.
And
yep.
I don't know if that, I think you made the verbiage of still a good advertising method, or still, you said that podcast ads are still a good method of advertising. I would argue that it's undervalued, and that companies like this that are trying to compare listening to a podcast ad to digital spending on Facebook or digital spending on, Google, those are just, you can't compare these platforms like that. I disagree with how they came up with this number. I get it. They're trying to sell a service or a product. I just think that, studies like this are more to benefit like the iHeartMedias of the world, not necessarily like the podcasters like us, where, we have a responsibility to our audience, and we have a responsibility, to our advertising partners to explain the reality of these things. And, we live in a digital world, but not everything can be traced back in a singular purchase line where I listened to this episode with this ad and this person became a customer or bought my product within 45 days. It just doesn't exist. You can look for the signals that your ads are working, but there's a lot of different variables at play there. So just be cautious when, I guess, using studies like this from, big podcasts. Maybe that's the phrasing I'm looking for. Big podcast media versus, shows like ours where we are on the ground explaining the value of advertising with us and what that means to our clients. Our clients aren't looking for studies like this. This is for marketing departments to make themselves feel better about the money that they're spending.
Solid advice to end on. This is where we turn the tables to our listeners and our subscribers and ask their thoughts on the topic. What do you think about podcast ads? You run podcast ads. What's your limit? All right. Are you a 2 ads only type of person? Do you put more ads on your show? And if you end up reading the report and you find something that either complements the point I was trying to make or contradicts it, let us know. We would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on today's topic. If you aren't subscribed to the channel, do me a favor. Just hit subscribe and just be done with it. All right. You know you're going to come back for more episodes. And if you're listening to the audio version, hopefully you're subscribed, but hopefully you've already left a rating and review because you know how much that helps and you know how much we'd appreciate it. But in the meantime, you guys take care and we'll catch you around. All right. Peace.